There's Jupiter in my binoculars, all golden. I can just barely see those moons. Hey, everybody, there you are. I'm Stargazer Mark, and we're glad you're with us to stay curious. Every Monday, the American Space Museum brings you Backyard Astronomy with me, Stargazer Mark, and we're so glad that you joined us on Facebook Live, YouTube, and maybe Twitch. But please tell your friends to like us, share us, follow us, subscribe to us, whatever they want to do to us to hang on and get us to bigger numbers so our nonprofit can reach out and monetize our program here. We're so close to getting 1,000 people following us on YouTube, and we need about another 1,000 on Facebook to hit that 10,000. We're not trying to be the biggest or the best. We just want to We're in our own lane of preserving space history and inspiring the next generation, and we're so glad you're with us to help us stay curious. But like I said, on Mondays, it's all about backyard astronomy. And with me, Stargazer Mark, I've been doing this for more than 50 years, and you hate to admit that when you get old, but it's the truth. I've been looking at Jupiter in my backyard since I was just a little boy with that first telescope, and I'm going to tell you what you can see, because Jupiter, look at it, glorious behind me here. This is a close-up view from NASA's latest Jupiter spacecraft called Juno. And you're seeing the red spot over there. And at the top up here is actually the shadow of one of Jupiter's Galilean moons that Galileo discovered on its surface up there. But when you look at Jupiter up close through spacecrafts, it looks completely different than from our own backyard. It looks like a Van Gogh painting. It looks like something that I saw at the craft fairs this weekend. It's just unbelievable. You can't make this stuff up. You can't draw it. You can't paint it. It is, nature is always more crazier than your imagination, I think. And we're going to share some more of that with you here. But first, I wanted to thank Jessica Galloway for being here behind the controls. And we're missing Marty today. He had an appointment he had to keep, but Marty will be back with us for our regular Stay Curious programs throughout the week. But Stargazer Mark is on Mondays to show you what you can see in your own backyard, get you inspired with a pair of binoculars. Everyone's got a pair of binoculars. You can see craters on the moon, and you can see the moons of Jupiter with binoculars. And you can buy a device to hold them steady on a tripod, but always put your elbows against your chest, and that'll help you steady them there. But I'm going to show you a little bit about what Jupiter looks like from my buddy Paul Robinette. Paul Robinette is a good friend of mine in Bristol, Tennessee. Hi, Paul. This is a photograph he took with what was an equivalent about a 600 millimeter lens, telephoto lens system, where you see Jupiter's moons. All right. You see Jupiter's, the 4 moons, 2 on each side there, and the globe, and little trace of the bands of Jupiter there in this photograph by Paul Robinette. And this is low power in a telescope. Any of those telescopes that may be in your closet that someone got for Christmas, it's out in the shed or under the bed. Get that out. Find the highest number eyepiece, which is 25 millimeter usually. You're going to see Jupiter like this, just like I was showing all kinds of people this weekend at some star parties I attended. So, but Jupiter's moons move every night, and that was the amazing thing that Galileo figured out when he turned a telescope for the first time to Jupiter in 1609. He saw that, wait a minute, there are these little stars around Jupiter. And then the next night, the stars had moved. 400 years ago, it was believed that everything went around the Earth. All right, we're just 400 years removed from believing that the sun is the center of our solar system and the Earth is just the third rock from the sun going around it. This actually ended, Galileo ended him up in house arrest for the last 10 years of his life. He had to recant it, that it was blasphemy to say that the Earth was going around the sun 400 years ago, and it all started with seeing the moons of Jupiter go around this planet. And Galileo said, wait a minute, everything does not go around the Earth. Something's going around Jupiter. And is revolutionary, and just, it's amazing to think just 400 years ago in 1609, you could have been burned at the stake or put in jail for believing that the Earth went around the sun. At any rate, That was how science develops. And here is a beautiful shot taken by our museum friend, Derek Demeter. He's a planetarium director at the Bueller Planetarium in Sanford, near us here in Titusville, Florida. There you start seeing what you're going to see with your eye with a bigger telescope and more power. You're going to see the bands of Jupiter. You can just see hints of a couple of the moons there. They're always going to be with the bands, all right, in the same parallel plane. And these bands of Jupiter change because as you're looking at them every night, Jupiter, though it is the largest of all the planets, and we'll talk about that in a second, it is the fastest day of any of the planets. Though it is the largest planet at 88,000 miles across, every planet and everything in the solar system can comfortably fit inside of Jupiter. That is no joke. It is twice as big as everything, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, all the asteroids, all the moons, Mars, Jupiter, everybody weighed on a scale. Jupiter's twice the weight of all of those. We call that mass, of course, in science. So it's a gigantic world. Seen in the night sky tonight, it is, look south. It's going to be to your left, the brightest star in the sky. It's going to be gold. And so 5,000 years ago, when those ancient stargazers in Mesopotamia, the area that is now Iraq and Iran of Earth, that's where the cradle of astronomy started, they noticed that 5 of these stars in the sky moved. And Jupiter moved every 12 years. It went completely around the entire sky. It was gold. It was very bright. Therefore, we're going to call it the king of the gods, said the Greeks when they started naming the planets after their Zeus. And then Rome, of course, stole everything from Greece, and they changed their gods to the Roman gods, so it's Jupiter or Jove. That's where we get the expression by Jove, okay, by Jupiter. Because it was gold, so bright, it had to have royalty connected with it. Little did they know that it was the biggest planet, calling it the most important god, Jupiter. I want to encourage you to not just photograph Jupiter, but sketch it. This is a crude sketch, admittedly, that I took last weekend in our parking lot while I was watching Jupiter. And there you see, I sketched out the lines of it. That black spot there is not sort of like a beauty mark, all right, is girls use that. They don't have beauty marks like they used to. They call them tattoos now, I guess. No, they stick a diamond in their chin. That's what the beauty mark is. But a beauty mark used to be a little black dot you put on your chin, and Marilyn Monroe had one. That is the shadow of a moon that is off to the right, okay, off to the other direction there. And here we're showing in our background, there is a shadow of a moon on top of the cloud deck of Jupiter. Just so amazing to see. But I want to encourage you to be a little artistic or draw your rendering of Jupiter the way you see it. This is the way I saw it the other night. The red spot's in there. It's just not that bright because it didn't look that bright. Now, I've been watching the red spot since the 1960s, and we've been watching it since it was a large telescope first saw it in like the 1650s. It's a cyclone, a tornado that has been going on for over 400 years on Jupiter, and we're trying to figure out why. But there I'm just showing you my little sketch of Jupiter, something that you could do to have fun with. Here's another sketch that I did of the same night, kind of making my notes and the way it looked to me. Yes, you can see colors like that. You can see these white ovals sometimes in some of these cloud bands, and the cloud bands are constantly changing. And as the night wears on, you can see the red spot and all of the features move from right to left because Jupiter it rotates in 10 hours. So it's flattened at the poles a little bit. It's noticeably has a bulge in the center of it. It's not a complete round sphere because it's going so fast. The winds are thousands of miles an hour. And as we look up, so get out and maybe look at Jupiter, what you see, sketch what you see. Doesn't have to be an artistic creation. This is what it means to me. This is my record of Jupiter. It belongs to me and nobody else. And you can make some of your own sketches of objects you see in the sky or be inspired by the constellations to draw something out there. But here's another beautiful photo taken by my friend Johnny Horn, who's in Stedman, North Carolina, an avid amateur astronomer. Johnny's in Astronomy magazine a lot with some of his work. Fabulous photo. And a lot of these backyard astronomers have very technical equipment that takes many photos, like 200 photos of Jupiter in a 10-minute period, and then they put it in software that throws out the bad ones, combines the good ones, and this could be 50 shots of Jupiter taken at one time. There you see again up at the top is another moon of Jupiter shadow caused by this moon over here. All right, so we wanted to thank all of our new viewers out there. Jessica held up. We've got some new viewers on Twitch that we're grateful for. Twitch is a gamers platform, and anyone that's into gaming certainly is into a little bit of science and wants to look up and stay curious. So therefore, we're glad that we're reaching out to all kinds of people, and we're so glad about the YouTube. Please, we're within just 100 or so of getting our 40. We need 40 more YouTube watchers to show them things in the sky like tonight there. So this is just an awesome picture. You can see in a big telescope, and I'm talking that 10-inch reflector and up, you can see some of this detail with your own eye. It's very fleeting in and out all of the time as the atmosphere changes. And that's a key. When you look through a telescope, you just don't look through a telescope and say, oh, and walk away after 5 seconds. You absorb it. And because the air of the sky is like little pillow cells, and some areas will be real clear and others will have dirty air in it as it passes in front of your telescope. Sometimes the heat off of the nearby building will give you heat waves until it settles out, and then you start seeing better things in the sky. So I wanted to talk about Jupiter a little bit. We've had all kinds of spacecraft go to Jupiter. Yes, Jessica, you were...
that picture back there, I'm going to steal it back over. Do you think that black spot is another one of the shadows of those moons?
Yes, at the top is another moon over here, as I point to that direction. From this moon here, see that moon there is actually the sunlight is projecting a shadow across space that's hitting Jupiter. As we said, Jupiter is gigantic. It is the solar system's deflector of comets and meteors. It has probably saved the Earth from several disasters, though we know 65 million years ago there was an asteroid that hit the Earth that took away the dinosaurs and life as we know it 65 million years ago. That could happen any time. But what we're seeing now is there's so many amateur astronomers around the world with high-tech video equipment that are like 24/7 we're looking at Jupiter now, all right? And recently, about 2 months ago, one of these amateur astronomers saw something hit Jupiter as a bright explosion on it. I forget how many years ago, I think it was 1989 is when the comet Shoemaker-Levy hit Jupiter. Maybe it's 92, but we actually saw this comet rip to shreds into 21 pieces by Jupiter's gigantic gravity. And when it came back around again, these pieces were drawn in by Jupiter's gravity, and 21 pieces hit Jupiter. And of course, it happened on the backside, as fate would have it. But when the Jupiter's clouds moved around, we could see these black spots on them, very dramatic. You could see them with the telescope in your backyard. So things are hitting Jupiter every day. The bigger ones, we're going to be seeing more of them as amateur astronomers are constantly looking at Jupiter. And you know what? It has taken these hits for us, for Saturn, and for Jupiter and Mars, and they're hitting Jupiter instead of Mars and Earth and Venus and Mercury. Though when you look at Mercury, it looks like it's been in a shooting gallery. The erosion of Earth and Venus have wiped out most of our meteors that have hit us. Of course, they mostly burn up in the atmosphere before they hit the ground. But an interesting thing about Jupiter is we're looking here at the Juno spacecraft that is now orbiting Jupiter. We have sent 2 Pioneer spacecraft in the 1970s, and they were very crude compared to the technology and the videos today. Then we spent several Voyager 1 and 2 went by Jupiter on their way out to the solar system to investigate Saturn. And of course, Voyager 2 went to Uranus and Neptune, the only spacecraft to do that. New Horizons, when it headed out towards Pluto on its 8-year, 9-year mission, it used a gravity assist from Jupiter, so it had pictures of Jupiter on the way out, as did the probes that went to Saturn, including the Cassini spacecraft that orbited Saturn for many years. And next week, we're going to talk about Saturn, because Saturn, as you're looking at Jupiter in the night sky, Saturn is at about 3 o'clock from it, all right? And it's a softer yellowish star, but that's the planet Jupiter. And we'll talk about that next week on Backyard Astronomy here on Stay Curious. Wanted to point out some interesting fact, though, as we look at Jupiter there, again from Juno. While I talk about Juno, this spacecraft here is orbiting over the poles of Jupiter. It's going out about 2 to 3 million miles away from Jupiter, and then it's doing a big loop and coming back and dive bombing Jupiter down to about 5,000 miles above its cloud tops. Jupiter is such a dynamic world. It is mostly hydrogen and helium, just like our sun. In fact, if it was about 100 times bigger or more massive, it would have become a star and ignited a nuclear furnace like our sun did. So it is, in a way, a star that didn't quite make it. It needed to be a lot bigger to make it. But it emits its own radiation as the gravity's pulling everything in and creating heat inside the core. That hydrogen is turned into maybe a metallic hydrogen, a liquid core hydrogen. And outside of Jupiter is a tremendous electromagnetic field that Juno and all the other spacecraft that have been there had to be hardened from, had to be nuclear hardened. Now, 32 years ago this week, in 1989, Space Shuttle Atlantis was launched on STS-34 with the Galileo space probe. That was the first spacecraft to orbit Jupiter, and it was a very successful 10-year mission. And Juno is picking up where Galileo left off, with even better cameras and coming in closer to show us incredible views like this. And as Juno goes over the North and South Pole, it is showing us views of Jupiter like we've never seen before, like this close-up of the red spot. 3 Earths could fit across this, okay? The Earth is 8,000 miles across. This is about 25,000 miles across there. An interesting fact about Jupiter, the Sun, and the Earth is they are each a ratio of 10 of each other. Jupiter's 80,000 miles across. It's 10 times bigger than the Earth, that's about 8,000 miles across, and the Sun is 800,000 miles across. So that's an easy ratio to think about, is that the Earth is 8,000 miles across. Jupiter is 10 times bigger than the Earth at 80,000 miles across, or 88 actually. And the Sun is 800,000 miles across, or 10 times bigger than Jupiter. Just incredible to look at these Juno images. This is the South Pole of Jupiter. It is a complete mishmash of cells that we don't quite understand all of the atmospheric things going on here. That's why we've gone there to learn and find out. But again, you cannot make this up. You can't draw it. You can't create it in your mind as what it looks like in real life there on Jupiter. This is part of a white spot there, and some of this 300 below zero at the cloud tops is where this hydrogen is, and mixing with materials and minerals inside the core that are thrown up gives us all these beautiful colors of Jupiter. And what are we looking at here? We are looking at lightning on Jupiter. Incredible that we are looking so close at one of those 5,000 mile passes above the surface. It's going super fast. It's going 50,000 miles an hour. Its cameras are on platforms to sway them, to match that motion. And it has picked up all over Jupiter tremendous amounts of lightning going on. It's just crazy as can be. And we need to know more about it. Of course, Jupiter does not have a surface that we could land on. It is all strictly gaseous surface until you get closer to the inside where we think a metallic core may exist. But talk about artistic license. It's just an incredible world we're looking at that we want to understand more about. But from your own backyard, this is what Jupiter looks like, all right? And I did want to mention just a couple of the moons of Jupiter, all right, because we are now launched last week. We are now going to figure out what these early remnants of the solar system are that are in Jupiter's orbit. Jupiter goes around the sun at about 840 million miles away from, no, 480 million miles away. About 500 million miles away from the sun is Jupiter. We're 93 million miles away. Okay, so it's 5 times further. But ahead of it in its orbit and behind it in its orbit are not just 10 or 12, but hundreds of clumps of asteroids we call the Trojan asteroids. And those asteroids are the primordial beginnings of our solar system. Jupiter being the largest object in the solar system, obviously it was one of the first to condense out of this cosmic cloud that the sun came out of. So we are on our way with a spacecraft called Lucy that was launched Saturday morning to go and look at these Trojan asteroids that went to that are ahead of and behind Jupiter in its orbit. And those of you on the Space Coast, even those of you on the West Coast, could see a beautiful morning launch. It was 5:34 in the morning. The Atlas rocket went up through a cloud and illuminated it. It was gorgeous. And we put some pictures on our Facebook about that for you to enjoy. So, but Jupiter just doesn't have these 4 giant moons. These 4 moons of Jupiter, we're going to have a program about later. They are all worlds of their own. 3 of them are icy bodies. One of them has more water on it underneath its icy crust, has more water on it, Europa, than all the oceans of Earth. All right, think about that. And we want to take a probe there to go in those oceans and see if something's living in those oceans, because where there's water, there's always life on Earth, all right? So go outside and you can see the moons like this, even in your binoculars held steady. Any inexpensive telescope will show you the moons of Jupiter, and they're fun to watch as night after night. You can make a little chart of that, all right, just as long as like you can. Or like I showed you earlier, make your own little impression of Jupiter. Write a poem about Jupiter, maybe a song. After all, there's a sketch to inspire you up there. There was a hit song called Drops of Jupiter. And Train was the band that did that. So Jupiter's always on our mind. And I'll tell you what, we're always asking you to look up and enjoy some stargazing from your own backyard. All you need is really a red flashlight so you can read your star chart and under the night light and not have to have your eyeballs contract. They dilate open, of course, when you're in the darkness, and the red doesn't affect that. So get your red light, get your star chart, go out and enjoy a little bit of stargazing. And I know it's getting a little chilly and cool up there up north, and but down south in the southern hemisphere, they're just starting to get into their warm period down there. So wherever you are, dress appropriately, take you some snacks, sit in a comfortable chair, and get out there and do a little bit of stargazing like I'm going to do here. And until the next time we see you, I'm going to be stargazing all to bridge the space between us. Marquette saying, stay curious and join us next week for some more backyard astronomy tips. But join us tomorrow as we're going to bring you some more space history and other interesting facts about our American Space Museum, all to bridge the space between us and help you stay curious. See you later.